By the time I was 24 years old, I was a homeless heroin addict. I weighed 100 pounds. I had hepatitis C. I had about 50 years worth of uh, jail sentences hanging over my head, and had pretty much burnt my life completely to the ground at that point.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself thinking, I've done the work, I've tried the tools, I've brought them into my everyday life, but why does this still feel so hard? Why do I still feel stuck? It's like we know what we need to do, but we have a hard time actually translating it into everyday life. Maybe you circle back with the same anxious thoughts, or you have a quiet voice that keeps creeping its head up. I like to call it a gremlin that says, you're still not enough. You're maybe showing up for others, but it's getting harder to stay connected to yourself, and you're not sure why. If that resonates, keep listening. I'm sitting down with Eric Zimmer. He's the host of The One You Feed, a podcast that's reached millions of listeners, and we dive deep into the art of interchange. Eric's interviewed hundreds of experts, maybe even thousands at this point, but he also brings his own lived experience with addiction, self-sabotage, and the long road back to emotional steadiness. In this conversation, I want to point out a few things that we actually talk about in here that you're going to want to listen to. We talk about the root of that voice that tells you you're faking it. We talk about why we struggle to receive the good in our lives, why it's so hard to even take a compliment at times. And we also touch on a simple but powerful framework Eric uses called the Six Saboteurs of Self-Control. These are tools that can help you stop repeating the same painful loops. He has a whole document of it that you can download and get. This episode is about understanding your patterns with more kindness and learning how to finally shift them with more clarity and courage. So if you're craving the real tools, real honesty, and a sense that you're not alone, and we should all really have that sense, because the reality is there's nothing any of us are experiencing that is unique to us in this moment. There's been trillions of humans over history, and we've all had similar emotions over time, or even in subgroups of people. So just know that there is a common humanity behind all of our experience. So I'm going to invite you to stay with us for this full conversation. Okay, let's go. Eric Zimmer, welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really glad to be here.
So, you and I have known each other for, I'd say, a while now, whether on your podcast, The One You Feed, which is an extraordinarily popular and impactful podcast. And so you've touched millions of lives over this time, and I've always been impressed by that and what you've done. I remember you and I having a phone call a while back where you were sort of mentoring me for a moment about how to even start a podcast. But I want to talk a little about you now and like your story, because I think it's going to be meaningful to a lot of people, how you went from, heroin addiction, homelessness, to hosting one of the most popular podcasts out there on emotional growth. And tell us a little bit about the moment when you felt like the bad wolf was winning, and how you kind of shifted from there.
Yeah, you sort of alluded to it, right? By the time I was 24 years old, I was a homeless heroin addict. I weighed 100 pounds. I had hepatitis C. I had about 50 years worth of jail sentences hanging over my head, and had pretty much burnt my life completely to the ground at that point. And the story of kind of what happened then is on one hand, it seems like a very simple story, which is I went into a treatment center and I got sober, and I stayed sober. For about 8 years after that. I went back out. I drank for a couple of years, and now I've been back about 17 years. So that's the very high level version. And I'm happy to dive into any specific aspects of it that you would like to.
Well, I guess one thing that I remember in graduate school years ago, I was studying the science of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is hope really made out of? And so sometimes we need that. But one thing I did uncover was there's an incredible power behind it. And sometimes people, when they're in this really dark place or difficult, challenging place, a lot of people in their own right now are in quite a challenging place, and the world's in an incredibly exciting / place of uncertainty / a lot of really disturbing things happening
Hmm.
too, and just people need a flicker of hope. What was your flicker during that time? Like what was there for you?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because I can actually talk a little bit about this because I think a lot about it. So I had gone on, I knew I had a problem well before I got sober. I probably had known, I mean, almost within the first 6 months of, starting to drink and do other drugs. And I had this idea in my mind that when it got bad enough, I would pull the ripcord of treatment, which seemed like the last resort, but such an extreme thing to do. But I would pull that ripcord and then I would be okay. And I finally hit a point where I pulled that ripcord. I went to treatment. I stayed sober 30 days and I started using again. Now, I had gone to meetings a few times before that. I think I had even done a short detox before that. And that period of time was perhaps the darkest and most dangerous of my addiction because what I felt like was, okay, I did what everybody says you have to do to get over this, and I didn't get over it. So that old saying of once an addict, always an addict must be true. And I just thought I was going to die this way. I ended up being not, well, you could call it sort of coerced into a treatment center again, more because I had been living in a van and the van was taken away and I had been arrested and I was out of money and I was going to be dope sick. And I went in there and it was just basically like, just let me buy a few days to figure out what I'm going to do. And when I was there, they said to me, we think you need to go to our long-term treatment. And I originally said no. And I went back to my room. I remember it was in an old tuberculosis hospital. It was winter. It was cold, gray. And I just realized, like, if I go back out there, I'm going to die or I'm going to go to jail for a long time. And so I said, I'll go to treatment. And somewhere in that early treatment, hope started to come back. And I can't say exactly why. I think the hope is always, at least in recovery, from other people, because you see other
Hmm.
people start to say, hey, I was just like you. And you can tell they were because they can tell the story. They know, they understand. And now I'm over here. And we focus a lot on people having to hit bottom for recovery. And are important. Like if your life's going fine, why would you ever give it up? Right? We're people who deeply love substances, right? I love them.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't give them up except under extreme duress. So we focus on the bottom a lot, though. But I think what you're pointing to is the second key component, which is the hope. And I think when you have the consequence come together with the hope, you've got sort of the fertile ground that recovery can grow out of. And then the other element that I think is important about this, and this is kind of a long answer, but is that the times I'd gone to AA, the times that I had gone to NA, the times I had gone to a detox center, the time that I had gone to treatment, those were not wasted efforts. They were part of the process of me getting to a point where I achieved something like permanent sobriety. And so often hope ends. We think hope ends when we try something and it doesn't work. But my experience is we keep trying. There's a line in 12-step programs that say, keep coming back. And I love that line. I don't mean keep coming back to 12-step programs. I mean, keep coming back to your own recovery, whatever that looks like. Keep coming back to your own healing, whatever that looks like. Because change is a process of learning. We figure things out over time. And so to me, that's kind of the big message of hope is keep coming back.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a couple things. It reminds me of growth mindset, the idea that
Yes.
life is about learning, not about performance.
Yes.
And it reminds me, I was saying to someone the other day, like years ago, I remember I was listening to Oprah probably when I was a teenager, and she was like, life is a classroom. Of course, she was kind of saying something that other people had said prior to her, but life is a classroom, and when you fall down, it's really about what you pick up. And
Yeah.
but your story reminds me a little bit of mine. We have just a lot in common. Where for me also, I had an intervention in my mid 20s, because my life was fairly out of control, and with mainly some specific drugs, and um, and I was invited to go to a 30-day. Uh, it was more of like an adult retreat versus a recovery specifically, but it was sort of my recovery.
Hmm.
And there, like everything kind of changed for me. And I actually didn't feel a lot of cravings or urges or anything like that. In fact, I was voted at the time most likely to become a rabbi, and and but when I came back, and it only took me 2 weeks to fall back into my old
Yeah.
habits.
Yeah.
And that taught me a really powerful lesson about the power of, like you said, when you said you don't have to come back to A, but there is a community component. There's a power to community and to your environment.
Yeah, both those things are hugely important. I think environment plays a big role. I mean, we talk a lot about habits as become sort of a cultural touchstone. James Clear's book Atomic Habits has sold a bajillion copies. And,
Uh-huh.
I have a program called Wise Habits. And the thing about habits, though, that most of us don't understand is that they are extraordinarily context specific. Meaning, for something to become habitual, it has to happen in kind of the same way, in the same place, at the same time. I'll give you an example. My partner is about to go away to Europe for a couple of weeks later this week. Once she leaves, all my established patterns run the risk of completely coming unraveled because it's such a change to the norm. And so it's part of what you're describing. You go away for treatment, which is a valuable thing to do, but you build a community there and you come back and you have no community,
Right.
and you're back in an environment you're not ready for, right? That you haven't prepared for. That's not an argument to say don't go away to treatment. It's a thing to say you have to think very closely about how you get back and bridge that gap, right? How do you specifically realize that that's going to be a really touchy period where you've got to kind of think about how you replicate those things.
Prepare. Yeah.
Prepare. But that's
No.
yes.
Well,
That's a
I'm not.
shorter
Well,
way of saying it.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of the man, Henry Ford, for a variety of reasons. Uh, Although the assembly line was something that was really, quite revolutionary. But his quote of "failing to prepare is preparing to fail"
Yes.
is, there's a truth. There's a little bit of a truth behind that.
There is.
I want to talk a little bit about these two wolves. So I remember when I was first introduced to this, like many, many years ago. And I thought it was such a powerful metaphor. And then you've really kind of like made it, the whole, obviously millions of people on the title of your podcast. And you've often talked about how these two wolves aren't just like it's not just idea. It's not just a parable. It's a compass. And like you use it to be able to say, what direction do I want to go in right now? And right now, I would say, I don't know, I'm feeling this. I'm sure a lot of other people are feeling this, like between all the different, our exposure to all the different wars that are going on, um, a lot of fear in our country, especially amongst people who might be deported and taken away. And this is the
Mm-hmm.
United States anyway. There's a climate anxiety, which hasn't even really gotten as much press as it would if it wasn't drowned out by all the other stuff that's happening right now. And then
Yep.
there's this introduction to a new technology that's completely, um, drawing us in with all kinds of thoughts and feelings and emotions around artificial intelligence is what I'm talking about. The
Yep.
social unrest that's happened. So anyway, a lot of stuff happening. How does it serve as a compass? Talk to us about that. These two wolves.
Well, the core idea, right, is it says we have the parable. For people who don't know it, we've got two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One's a good wolf, the other's a bad wolf, and which wolf actually wins is the one that you feed. Now, it's funny that somebody who is as opposed to binary thinking as I am would have spent 11 years with that binary of a story. I don't think if I was starting today, that might be what I would use to anchor the show around. But I think it does point to the core truth of which is our choices matter. We have choice, and they matter. And so, as a compass, that's just a simple, easy sort of compass. But the words good and bad don't work for everybody. I think in Buddhism, it's often used skillful and unskillful. I really like that, right? That's that. Now, that's a boring parable. Like, who wants to talk about an unskillful wolf, right? Like, it kind of loses its teeth, quite literally. But were ideas like that, or ideas of like, is this love or is this fear? Again, life isn't that simple, but those sort of making it that simple, at least directionally, often helps. So for me, I think a lot about when I think about early recovery. And the reason that this parable landed so hard for me is I heard it in early recovery. And it was very clear to me. Like, I wasn't even feeding the bad wolf anymore. I feel like he was eating me at that point. But it was very clear that there are recovery is this direction, addiction is that direction. And I was fortunate enough to be in a place where people gave me very clear instructions. Do this, do this, do this, do these things, and you got a good shot at recovery. And so I could look at anything I was going to do and say, is it going to move me closer to recovery? Is it going to move me closer to my addiction? Sometimes I don't know the answer. Sometimes we don't know the answer, which is why we come back to community being so important, right? Discerning these things is often best done in a community, but a lot of times we really do know. If we touch inside for a minute, we know what the right choice is. And by right, I just mean the choice that's right for us. We often really do know if we pay attention internally. And so sometimes, even though, like I said, I don't love binaries, sometimes painting it that directionally can be really helpful.
Yeah. We first need the clarity of like where we're trying to go. And then we can say, is this feeding this or that? I do think like when we're talking about like how we treat ourselves, the types of things we're ingesting, whether it's whether it's our own self-talk, or if we want to take it even further, our own physical health. We might that I don't think that a parable initially is really about that, but maybe it is around like, am I feeding the things that are towards health? Is it?
Well, I think you can certainly pivot it that way very easily, right? Because yes, you are, which wolf am I feeding, right? So there is a sense that you are feeding something, right? And you could take it very literally. What you feed yourself as that, what you feed your thoughts, what you feed yourself on a daily basis of. What do you read? What do you listen to? What do you watch? That is all, I think, a very direct way of thinking about this.
And I think it really simplifies it. And even though I do like how it simplifies, like, what am I feeding right now by engaging in this way in my life with this like endless scrolling, or with this talking to myself this way, or with being in these relationships or engaging in these relationships that are maybe depleting for me, or in the way that I'm relating to them, it's depleting anyway. The constant complaining in my head, what am I feeding? And then how do I introduce things? And I guess I'd put this back in your lap for a second. Like, how do I introduce things to support the, what you might call the kind of good wolf? I mean, we could say like the healthy, element of it, right? What is that? How do you make that pivot? Because there's people listening to this right now that are like, I think the biggest thing that I found, and will lead into this question for you, is that a lot of people know what to do. They know what's healthy for them. They know, what to pay attention to and not. I mean, it's just the follow through. That's the or the clarity and follow through around it.
Yeah. That's to a large extent what my book that'll come out next spring tries to address. And I think that I'm going to give two general ideas real quick. The book right now is called How a Little Becomes a Lot. And it points to the fact that change happens little bit by little bit, even in a dramatic case like mine. If you were going to film the movie of my life, you would go back to that old tuberculosis hospital in the dead of winter, and you would see me go back to my room and have this moment of clarity. Oh, I'm going to die. And I go back and I tell the counselor I'll go to treatment, and the music swells in the background, and maybe I get a little misty eyed, right? Like that's the movie moment. But that moment only has meaning because of the thousands of small decisions I made day after day after day after that. Right? Because if I didn't make all those decisions, I would go back out and use, and then that moment would just be another, it'd be another log to throw on the case of I'm a failure. We tend to over prioritize that epiphany moment. And we want 5 quick steps to change. We want things to be easy because life is hard, right? So we want change to be easy. And I could go through all the reasons why small steps give you a much better chance of success. And we can go into that as much as you want. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that I think when it comes to making changes, there are 2 elements that we need to get right, 2 components. And I often find people focus on one or the other. The first is structural. And this is the sort of thing that James Clear is writing about. This is the sort of thing that the stages of change model is often talking about, although they go a little bit more in depth. It's, do I have a plan? Do I know why I want to do something? Do I have people to help me? Do I have specificity? Have I thought about what I'll do if I can't do it? Have I thought about what I'll do if I do it? I try and do it and it doesn't work. It's all structural. And that's really important. I mean, that can take people a long way. Sometimes all the way.
That imagine gives clarity in some way. If it's
Yeah. I often say that ambiguity is one of the mothers of procrastination. If you're not crystal clear on what you're doing, and I mean like to remove all doubt, then that doubt about what to do, that figuring it out, sucks energy away from the doing it. If I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, well, I know I should exercise today. This actually happened to me exactly this morning. I did not know exactly what I was doing today. I'm training.
You knew we were going to be together today.
I knew that. I didn't know what I was going to do exercise wise.
Yeah, okay, got it. I
could do strength training. I could do I'm training for this really outdoor hike that's multi-day that's going to be difficult. So I could go hike. I could just do stretching. That trying to figure that out sucks up so much energy that I often, when I'm in that spot, I end up doing nothing.
Yeah. Too many options.
Yeah. So the structural is really important. But even with the best laid plans, there comes the moment where you have to choose. Right? If my plan is at 8:30, I'm going to go do strength training, 8:30 comes. Right? And what happens in that moment is very often inner. It's a cognitive emotional thing that's happening. That when I don't do what I'm doing, I've fallen into one trap. And I've created this lead magnet called the Six Saboteurs of Self-Control. And it really explores like what happens in that moment when I'm at a choice point and I go the direction I wish I didn't go. What was I saying to myself? What was I feeling? Because now I can come back to that moment and I can try and say something different. I can try and bring a different way of thinking in. The problem when we try and diagnose not changing at all is it's so big. Why didn't I do it? Right? When we get specific enough that it forces us to choice points, then all we have to do at that point is look at the choice point. What was going on? So, here's an example. One of them I call the self-doubt stalemate, meaning that I doubt that I can do it. I'm working on, I just turned my manuscript in a couple months ago to the publisher. There are points where I'm getting ready to write where I think I can't write a good book.
I,
I mean,
I
this thing
literally,
sucks.
by the way, Eric, I literally have that written in this manuscript that I'm writing right now. That personal process of mine around self doubt
Oh,
and
beautiful. I'd love to hear
it,
it.
yeah, well, so and I'll just kind of mention it because I kind of note it in here because it's aligned so well. We have so much alignment, you and I. The I haven't my last book came out in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't know, maybe a little after that because I've written a couple of other things, 2016, something like that. So it's been a while since I've written another book,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a natural and so there's a natural kind of sense of um, I don't know, can I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone want to hear what I have to say? Like, as far as like this book, and there's these natural thoughts. And when I
Mm-hmm.
actually tease it back a little bit deeper,
Mm-hmm.
I tease it back to when I was 6 years old and my parents got divorced and my mom chose to leave our nuclear family because, she had the other thoughts in mind, things that are important for her. And but what it left me with was this sense of unworthiness, like the sense of not being worth her staying around, in our family, which is very aligned with self-doubt. Am I worth putting this book out? Am I,
Mm-hmm.
can I, is anything I put out there worthy of their people's attention? This type, and that's a little bit of a deeper core. That's part of this self-doubt type thing. Is anyone going to want what I have to read? Is because I haven't published in this many years. There's that, everything's kind of on top of it, but nevertheless, that voice is powerful and strong. And
Yes.
there's an emotional component, which can lead to just easily just not, procrastinate or other things that just
Yes.
avoidance in general, right? Yeah.
100%. 100%. I think what you said there is really insightful. I think there are two levels that go on there. One is, I think self-doubt is normal. I've had the opportunity to talk to hundreds of authors at this point, like probably
Yeah.
700, right? Many New York Times bestseller authors who will tell me on their new book, like I'll hear them be like, I'm working on my new book. There's no way I'm going to meet the deadline. I don't know if it's going to be any good. Like, it's endemic to trying to
Yeah.
create anything that's hard to create. Like, it just always happens. So I think the first is just for anybody who has self-doubt, of course you do. Of course you do.
Hmm.
And then there are some of us that bring baggage to that also, that amplifies it, right? And so you're sort of describing, you have the normal self-doubt that any author is going to have, anybody trying to create something meaningful is going to have. And then you also have a deeper self-doubt
Hmm.
that amplifies that. However, the solution in the moment is still the same for both, which is to find, what do you have to say to yourself to write? Now, you might also need to be on a journey of working on your worthiness on a deeper level, like you're talking about. But when you've decided that at 9 a.m. I'm writing, that's not the time to be unpacking childhood wounds, right? That's the time to figure out what to say to yourself so that you write. Because when you write, when you do the thing that you say you're going to do, you build confidence in yourself. And when you don't, you erode the confidence in yourself. And that process accrues over time.
Yeah. Another great favorite a book of mine that speaks to this is Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you ever heard of that
Yeah.
book. Uh, what's your process there in that moment for yourself? Like that moment you're about to sit down and write or something like that, or you're about to work out or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and that doubt comes up.
Can I say something about that book though
Oh
first?
yeah,
I've,
yeah,
I've
sure. Go
been
ahead.
I've been waiting
Sorry.
for the opportunity to say this. It's not positive either.
Oh, okay,
But
fair enough.
but again, I can't do it. I think in general the book is actually really, really good. But he says
Yeah.
something in it where he says, like, the root of all suffering in this world is people not following their artistic dreams. And I read that and I think that is insane. Like, all sorts of people follow their artistic dreams. Kurt Cobain, I mean, pick your musician, followed their
Uh-huh.
artistic dreams, and it didn't it didn't fix or cure them. So,
Yeah.
but I do think following your creative passions is useful and important. And I think that book is actually really good at it. It's just a slight little thing, little
My
bitchiness
takeaway,
there.
that makes sense to kind of grab one to illuminate that piece of it. My takeaway, my general kind of takeaway was like, this is how you get your butt in the seat every
Yes.
day,
Yep.
and here's some humor behind it, and like you just have to
Yep.
do it, sort of, right?
Yep.
And but then there's that self-doubt, right? Which is that the whole
Yeah.
piece of it, which he
So
names resistance, right? So
resistance. Yes. Resistance is a great word, right? And there's there is a behavior change writer named BJ Fogg. I don't know if you've ever heard of
yep.
him, but he has something called the Fogg behavioral model. And I'm going to describe it really quickly because I think it's really useful. You have two axes, right? One is the one that goes up and down. I don't know which one that is the is motivation. And then the one that goes left to right is ability. And he says that action happens when you are above where those two things meet. So that points to two things. And I think what that is saying in general is that resistance is a combination of how much you want to do it and how hard it is to do it. Now, motivation is about what it sounds like. It's kind of how much you want to do it. But ability is the one that's really sneaky because there's 1,000 things that go into your ability. And an ability is one of the things that's an ability is to be able to talk to yourself in a way when you're having serious self-doubt. But this is also why little by little works, because one way to get above that action line is to shrink the thing you're doing smaller and smaller. It becomes easier and easier and easier to do. So learning to talk through that self-doubt, that resistance is really important. I mean, for me, I kind of go through I guess I would say it's sort of a multi-step process, even though it just sort of happens more intuitively now. But the first is I just try and say to myself, okay, you don't want to do it, just do it. Like, can I disperse with the conversation?
But
Right.
you've recognized it first at that point.
I have recognized, well,
Yeah.
sometimes not even. Sometimes at that point, all I recognize is resistance.
You've recognized that.
So what I recognize is resistance. I haven't really analyzed it at this point. Step one is, can I just get myself to do it? And that is almost always some version of just start, right? Like, I've got a Peloton bike in the other room. My version of it for that is just put on your bike shoes and get on the bike. Like that's what I've put all my attention on, just starting. And oftentimes just starting gets me going. There's a particular friction. There's a launch cost to start anything, I think. And so sometimes if I can just say to myself, sort of trick my brain, just get on the bike, it gets me over that.
Taking a quick break here. If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd love to invite you to join my free newsletter. Every week, I share practical insights, tiny shifts, or emotional pivots you can make in your everyday life for your emotional health, and simple practices to help you build emotional resilience without the overwhelm. And when you sign up, you'll also get instant access to free guides I've created, like 5 AI prompts to ease anxiety and 4 steps to process difficult emotions, and more to come. It's the best way to stay connected, get my latest tools, and create a healthy inbox that supports your growth. Just head to the show notes, join the newsletter today. All right, back to the episode. I was thinking that there's something here talking about here between like this awareness and action, and there's that space, like that Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response. There's that space, right? So we're doing awareness and action. So you have this awareness of this resistance, or something's holding me back from taking action here. And I think a lot of people feel that way. They're stuck in anxiety or they're in avoidance or they're despair right now.
Yeah.
And so what are the patterns that you see? Because you've talked to so many people that actually keep them stuck in that don't lead to that. shift you're talking about?
Well, are we talking about they know they should be doing something and they're just not doing it, right?
That's
So I
right.
would say first is I coached a lot of people on behavior change. So I would ask some diagnostic questions, but since I can't really do that, I would first be venturing to say that a lot of those people, the plan isn't clear, right? They don't really know exactly. They know they should be in better shape, but what does that mean? That's a very vague goal. You can't follow through on that. I was thinking about this morning. When I look at my task list, I very often will put something on my task list, like what's the one that I was thinking about this morning? Work on community. We're launching a community this fall. That's what's on my task list. Those get procrastinated constantly, because what does that mean? Work on community.
Yeah, that's
there's
right,
50,
super big.
There's 50 things I could be doing, but that's where a lot of our intentions for change live. They live at that level. Eat better, get in better shape, meditate. They're these very vague, formless things. And as I said earlier, ambiguity is a big driver of procrastinating. You could almost say that it's not even procrastination if you haven't even decided exactly what you're doing and when. So that's, again, back to what we said earlier. That's the first one. The second one now is where we've got ourselves to the point where we have a decision to make in that moment. And as you said, I think step one is like aware that I'm there. A lot of us don't even know that. Like I have this way of bailing out of work. It only happens on my computer. And it's so old and lame that it kind of makes me laugh, but it's playing solitaire. That is my something. Now I've been able to analyze this over time, but here's what I would normally notice. I'm playing solitaire. Well, how the hell did I get here? I thought I was working. Now I've been playing solitaire. And so some of it is I'm not even aware, right? So a lot of times we may have a vague feeling, but we think about doing something, it feels hard, and the next thing we know, we're in our phone, we're somewhere else. So the first is to bring more awareness to it. And sometimes that's the level of change where it starts, is I now realize, okay, it's 9 a.m. I'm supposed to go for a walk around the block twice, and I didn't do it. But I at least realized that at 9 a.m. I made a choice not to do it. That you may need to realize that a few times, and that doesn't feel good. And that's important too.
Because that starts feeding that. Then that what happens is to me that then this is where the bad wolf comes in, right? To just kind of use this metaphor, right? We start saying like, "What's wrong with me? I can't do this. Look at me." Instead of the other mindset that you brought up a moment ago, which was that growth mindset, which said, "Well, hold on a second. This is actually good. Now I have more data points."
100%. 100%. I mean, the thing I used to say to coaching clients a lot was, because we take that I didn't go walk at 9 a.m. this morning as a personal failing, as a character flaw, as this is who I am. And the way that I always try and reframe things, so that awareness is important, right? But as we were saying, that mindset is really important. The one of growth mindset, or to use another popular term, self-compassion, whatever you want to call it. But for me, it's really what I would say to clients is this is a puzzle. We just haven't figured out the puzzle yet. But if we keep coming back, like we said earlier, we will figure out the puzzle, as long as you don't start to accept that this is the way you are, because it's not. Everybody can change. Now, people have differing degrees in which they can change and all of that, but we can all make positive steps in a direction. So I think the first is to recognize that moment. And so for me, by diagnosing it, I realized whenever anything gets difficult or hard, I don't know the answer, or I'm tired, I pop out to solitaire. And it happens almost with no conscious thought. So now I have a little thing on my computer. I just block solitaire. Now, There are 1,000 websites that I could play solitaire on, right? I've blocked one of them. I blocked the one that I play on, but that's enough because in that moment I go, oh, look what's happening. You're bailing out. And then I see, can I get right back to it? And if I can't get right back to it, then I go to that next level of, okay, I can't get back to it. There's resistance. I can't just get through the resistance. What's going on? What does the shape of this resistance look like? Oh, it's self-doubt. Oh, it's, the other one I call the insignificance trap. It's that, so what if I do this one thing? Right? It's the inability to connect my actions today to the broader changes. Like, so who cares? I'm just, whether I work out or not doesn't matter, right? One thing is insignificant. And on one hand, that's true. And on the other hand, it's completely important, right? Because things accrue over time. So first, I guess my process is to sort of summarize all this. Can I trick myself to just getting back to whatever it is I'm going to do with the minimum drama? Just secondly, if I can't, then I know I'm dealing with resistance. And at that point, I need to figure out what the shape of the resistance is and try and figure out what I can say to myself that will get me back to where I want to be.
This makes me think of, if something's light, we don't need to overanalyze it. It's cognitive. We can try and get back to what we're doing as soon as possible. If we're not able to do it, then there's something emotional underlying that, and then that's worth the analysis.
I think what you said there is really important, because what's blocking us could be something as simple as lack of a clear plan, all the way to some really big psychological issue. And the level of emotional activation we're feeling is going to really, to a certain degree, affect how cognitive, as you said, we can be, right? If I'm just feeling a little bit of self-doubt, I can talk. I have ways of talking myself through that. But if I'm totally freaked out, those are different stories, right? And I think recognizing what's happening more clearly will tell us how to sort of work with what's happening. I'm talking more about your sort of run-of-the-mill self-doubt, your sort of run-of-the-mill, I don't want to do it.
Like the everyday. The
everyday. And part of this process, the reason I talk about little by little, the other part of it that I didn't state is that when motivation goes up when we feel good about ourselves and our chances of success, and it goes down when we feel bad about ourselves or our ability to do something. So if we keep picking goals, things that are, too big for us, we keep not doing them, and that drives our motivation down. We are far better off to start stupidly small and succeed, and then build. Because as we succeed, we push our motivation up, and whatever the thing is gets a little bit easier. So we are able to do more and more with it being about the same level of ability. It's like if I went out today, I'm training for this backpacking trip. If I put 30 pounds on my back and went out and did 18 miles today, I could probably do it, but my motivation would have to be sky high to do it tomorrow.
And you'd be destroyed.
It would have to be, right. Yeah, it would have to be so high. And so we start out and we can do it. We can make ourselves go to the gym for an hour, but our motivation has to be really high. If on the other hand, we say, all right, I'm going to start by just getting a consistent habit of walking around the block twice at 8 a.m. And then I'm going to feel good when I do that. Now I can build. And soon I can walk around the block 4 times. And it's about the same level of hard. So I can now do it 6 times. The other thing that I will say is a common thing I find people really run into trouble with is that one of the real limiters in our ability to do something is time. So at a certain point, that little theory of mine will break down because it takes 10 minutes to walk around the block twice, but to walk around the block 20 times now takes 100 minutes. You're going to run into a constraint on time. That's the other reason that little by little is good.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Something I think a lot about, Eric, is what's happening in our culture right now, which is around uh, AI and our relationships, or how it's really impacting our life. And I like to ask everyone, because it's such a new thing. There's so much uncertainty around it. Um, I want to know, like, your thoughts around that, around how it impacts your life, emotional connection, disconnection, wherever you go with it is okay. Because I think we all want to hear how people are working with it right now.
Yeah, I have a lot of different feelings and thoughts about it. I do use it. It now becomes basically what I ask any question I have of, and I use it to help me think through ideas. I use it to help me brainstorm topics. I use it, I use it like I would use a really smart friend who was never got tired of me. And and yet it remains bizarre at the same time. It remains very strange to me. And I certainly don't know what's going to happen, but it feels like this is kind of a big deal. Now, when you get to be older, you think everything is, you're like, just back in the old days, it used to be better, right? So I'm always on guard for that perspective. Like, because I am getting older, but this feels really different. I was joking with somebody the other day and I was saying, it probably won't be me, but it's possible it's my son or maybe the generation after that, that there's going to be a family dinner and somebody's going to bring home an AI robot companion. And it's going to be an awkward first meeting, right? Like, what do you do with that? Oh, here's my companion, you know, Igor, and it's an AI, teddy bear on wheels or something. I think that's imminent. And I think a lot about also, I think of things in a sense of, you know, worst case, better case, best case. And so I think about like therapy. I think therapy, the very best case is you have a therapist that you have a good rapport with, who's highly trained and highly skilled. And that's the best case. The worst case, I think, is you have no access to any help at all. And then you have to then it becomes, well, would a very well trained, empathetic AI therapist be better than a bad therapist? And the studies out there are interesting because people tend to always rate an AI therapist as more empathetic and as solving their problems better, right up until they know it's an AI therapist. When they are blinded to it, they tend to grade it as better once they know. But I don't know that people that are much younger will continue to have that bias. So I just think it's a really strange time. I try and zoom out from the fear of it sometimes of what it's doing. And I try and think of like the human race as like a story I'm watching. And I'm like, ooh, this is a good plot twist. Like, wow,
Right, exactly.
what are they going to do now? Like in that regard, I think it's fascinating. To be living through it, though, I think can be pretty frightening in many ways.
Yeah, there's already these movies, to what you said. Someone's going to bring home a robot, and it's going to be, an AI companion. There's actually a movie called Companion. There's been another movie called
Oh, is there?
Megan. These are
Okay.
more dystopian, like here's how it goes wrong type of movies, that captures our interest.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, I think there's more and more. A couple years ago, I remember walking down Santa Monica with my son, and I was, these were when, and for those of you who don't know, these particular type of apps that have been out for a long time, these AI companion apps, Replica and some others, I said, in a year, everyone here is going to have like 60% of people here are going to have an AI companion. Maybe this was like a year and a half ago. And I told my and a year and later on I said, like more probably a couple months ago, I said to someone, and I was so wrong. People, we don't have that AI companion thing yet. Never said, what do you, everyone said, what do you, the person I was talking to said, what do you mean? People use ChatGPT or these other ones like an AI companion right now. And right.
Yeah, right. I don't think of it that way. I don't refer to it as a companion, but I do have a lot of conversations with it. I have a lot
Yeah.
of conversations with it. My partner has jokingly been like, you know, why don't you ask me some of these questions? Right. Like, I
Uh,
mean, seriously. So, because I'm always like, can you believe what this thing just did? Because it's either A, mind blowing, or it's bizarre, like when it starts apologizing, or when it starts taking on extraordinarily human like capacities, that are sort of freak me out a little bit when it does it.
Now, Esther Perel said like a year ago, there was somebody took all of her content without her permission and created an AI Esther Perel. For those who aren't familiar with her, she's a big relationship expert out there, and she was kind of first taken aback, and then she used it and said, "Wow, it responds sometimes better than I respond, I think."
Yeah,
And then she used AI. She played with the two letters, and she said, "But it's artificial intimacy, not AI means artificial
it's
intimacy versus
it's
artificial
true.
intelligence." Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's still on. That's that line is still clear for me today, in that I think of it as an intelligence, right? Not as an intimacy, as a substitution for an intimacy. But I
Hmm.
know a number of people that, use ChatGPT as like their therapist. I haven't really crossed into those waters yet so much. It's more, like I said, I've always found that I like to collaborate on ideas, and yet I work by, I mean, I have somebody who worked, I have a couple of people who work in the business with me, but I'm kind of the solo on what I do. And so I just love being able to just bounce questions off of something, but it stays on this side for me of me thinking of it really as a companion, even though I am using it as a companion. And I did the same thing. I did it, I trained, they call them clones. And the reason I did it is I was hoping that AI would be smart enough to help me figure out, like, what episodes did so and so talk about so and so. So I fed it every episode I've ever done, and I fed
That's a
it
lot of
my,
work.
yeah. Well, luckily it was a pretty quick process,
Okay.
um, and and like I just gave it basically our RSS feed and it sucked it in, and then I gave it like a bunch of documents and all this stuff. It was useless for what I wanted it to do, but it answered freakily like me. I was like, that is exactly what I would say, but it's slightly more articulate than I am. I've
Hmm.
never loosed the thing on the world. I just basically, once I realized it wasn't doing what I was going to do, I shut it down. But I was sort of amazed by it. Like, that's really weird.
Yeah, yeah. And that's only going to get better and better. By the way, it has a hard time with large scales of content to be able to sift through specifics like
Yep.
that. But that's everything's going to
Uh,
increasingly get better with that. I've created also a custom GPT just for my private therapeutic coaching program. Fed
mhm.
the whole program into it and gave it some parameters and instructions. And I was actually surprised how accurately it pulled information that people were looking for,
Yeah.
and told them where to find it, and was able to respond to them based on this approach that I have. But I'm
It,
still experimenting with it, so we'll see.
the one other thing I've completely forgot to say is I did a project with a company called Rebind, and Rebind, their vision was you could take like a great scholar and pair them with a book they knew very well. And so you could be in this app and you could read the book, but you could also have a conversation with this scholar about the book. And they approached me. I am a great scholar in nothing. So
Uh,
most everybody else that's doing it are like PhDs and best-selling authors and all these people. But they asked me to do the Tao Te Ching. So I created sort of my own interpretation of the Tao Te Ching. And then I basically gave it like 20 hours of me talking about the Tao Te Ching because it's my favorite book. And so now you can go to rebind.ai and you can actually get this book and have a conversation like you're having one with me. And it was my first foray into like, is there a way to use this for good?
Yeah. Is it your voice or is it just
No,
text?
no.
Okay, okay.
They
Because
they
that's available though. It could be. Yeah.
100%. I mean, there's so much of my voice out there that you could train an AI to sound just like me in like 5 minutes. There's hundreds of hours of my voice. And honestly, I was talking with Deepak Chopra recently, and he's got digital Deepak. It's one of these type
Yeah.
clones. And I was like, you know what? I probably could create a digital Eric. It could interview digital Deepak and be about
Uh-huh.
70% as good as you and I sitting here today, which is
You
really
know,
disturbing.
no, it is, but that would be I guarantee you if you created a digital Eric and a digital and had it interact and interview with a digital Deepak, people would watch it and listen to it just because it's fascinating that it's almost mind-blowing that that's something that can happen.
I know. It'd
And
probably
I
be our
continue
most
to
listened to episode ever.
eh,
I'd be like, well, it's the one that doesn't have me in it, but okay.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I think that the mindset that I like to bring to all this is curiosity, and just just kind of like watching, integrating, seeing my experience of it. And I do notice though, and that it could also add to our culture of overwhelm to some degree
A
because
hundred
it can
percent.
collaborate on so many ideas and create so many different ideas that you don't it's just so many, almost too much. You don't even know which way to go because there's so much.
And it it does. I mean, people talk about, does AI like take away your intelligence? And I think it has the capacity to, because it can produce stuff that seems so good at first glance. I was joking with Ginny the other day. I said, AI is kind of like a cheating spouse, right? Like you get burned by it. It does something really stupid. It messes a document up, whatever. And you're like, okay, I am going to check you all the time. And so you do it for a little while, but then it's being on its best behavior. It's on its best behavior. And you're like, all right, well, it's been a little while. You've been faithful pretty much for a while. And then all of a sudden you're like, God damn it. It happened again, where it's
Yeah.
like, as soon as I start to trust it, like, then I'm like, oh, nope. It went off the rails again. It went completely off the rails. And now, I think it's funny in that way. So
Yep. Okay. Well, more to come. This is obviously quickly evolving, and the integration of it into the field of emotional health and mental health is something to me fascinating. After all the interviews you've done, you said I'm not I don't have like this doctorate or whatever this was you said earlier, but you've done so many interviews over the past decade or more, 25 million downloads. I mean, which is an enormous number. And it might even be larger than what I'm saying.
it's bigger than that at this point, but
Uh,
yeah, but we
even
don't
bigger
need
than that.
even bigger. Yeah, whatever.
Even bigger.
It's a
And
long time though.
yeah, yeah. But what have you learned? What do you feel like you've learned over this time of hosting all these people and taking all of this in, about just emotional health, or what's going to be supportive to us, things that most people might miss?
I think I've learned that it's complicated. I think I got sober in a 12-step program, and there was just this idea that like that if everybody did these things, they would get sober. And then watching a lot of people not survive that, a lot of people die, I started going, maybe it's not that easy. And when I started doing coaching maybe 9 years ago, I similarly had this idea that like I could give somebody a 5-step program, right? And there are principles that are very valuable, and we are all unique, right? It's in the same way that I don't believe there's a right diet for everyone, right? There's a diet that might be right for you, But yours and I's might be very different. You might do great on a high carb diet with, lots of fruits and vegetables and grains. And I might do really good on like a ketogenic diet. And so I think on one hand, that's there's complexity there, which is why I think working with someone like you that can understand and help people translate that complexity is important. Because if somebody's like, well, just here's the 5 things you do, it may not be the right thing for you. The example I always give is some clients I work with need to cut themselves a break. Like they really need to go far easier and be far kinder than themselves. And then I have other clients who actually need to dial up the accountability a little bit, right? Like they need, if I gave the same advice to those people, it was going to be wrong for one of them. But what I do think are some common things, I think little by little is one of those things that I believe about change and about emotional health, that I feel like I can feel relatively confident that for most people, it's a good solution. It's because I think the good news is thought patterns and emotional ways of responding can absolutely change. That's the good news. And it also takes oftentimes a lot of reps. And so being in it in a longer term sense. And then I think the other one for me has just been this growing sense of there is a time and a place to engage in healing and growth. And there's a time and a place to let yourself be the way you are. To stop always thinking we need to be someone different, that there's some ideal out there that we're eventually going to reach, and that we're kind of always on the path. The path doesn't end because we're changing, the world's changing, the people around us are changing. And so expecting that I'm going to just do this work and then be done, I think is also a sort of false promise. So how do I recognize that, difficulty is part of life? I'm not going to eradicate that from the human condition, but I can certainly learn to work with it more skillfully. So those are a few thoughts.
I love that. And it's so that what comes up for me when you're saying that is like that mindset of curiosity is so important. And that comparing
Yep.
mind also is a bit of a trap, because it's like, oh, this diet worked for this person, or this therapist worked for this person, or whatever, this book worked for this person. But it might be, different for that person who's coming in with that. Yet there are certain similarities. If you can take also a large swath and say, these are general principles that are going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, the general Buddhist path takes a lot of pretty broad principles and is generally applicable, right? Is generally applicable to most people. But when you start really, when you start getting into the complexity of implementing and really living out some of these things, that's where I think you start to see more nuance.
So you're saying when people come to the One You Feed and they're listening to your podcast and they're listening to you interview people, they should come in with that sense of curiosity and try things on and see what they notice for themselves from the teachings there and the interactions they're learning from.
100%. 100%. Yep.
All right. Well, this has been really great. Thanks for lending us your time and all your experience and your wisdom from. I'm a big believer. You've done that many. First of all, you have your own experience, your own approach, your own expertise, and then you've taken all those experience of being with so many people. I think that that integrates into you. So it's very impressive to me. And
Thank you.
So where can people find out more who don't already know about you and
I
learn
mean,
from you?
You could look for our podcast in any podcast player. We're called The One You Feed, or you could go to our website, oneyoufeed.net, and that's all spelled out, ONEYOUFEED. And you can find the podcast there. You can find other things we've got going on. You can partake of many different things that we do. So,
okay. All right. Well, thank you, Eric. And I look forward to reconnecting again sometime in the not too distant future.
thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.